It's midday on February the 9th, 1944, near the harbour of Nice in southern France. 4 Supermarine Spitfires belonging to the 4th Squadron of the 52nd Fighter Group circle their targets like eagles stalking their prey. On board one of these fighters is pilot Robert Anderson Hoover. He dives for his target and releases the ordnance. The bombs whistle as they fall and strike the sea, exploding around the enemy vessel. Hoover then pulls up. It was a missed drop, but he doesn't have any time to fret over the mistake as he suddenly feels his aircraft is down on power. Simultaneously, high above the clouds, a squadron of FW-190s looks down upon the Allied aircraft below, and they spot an opportunity. Hoover's trying to control his misbehaving aircraft when he looks up and spots 4 enemies barreling down towards him. He instantly radios the other Spitfires for help as he steers his crippled plane towards the enemy. He fires upon the 190s and the enemy pull away from their head-on attack. They speed past each other and the German pilots turn around to get on the American's tail. But Hoover won't let it happen so easily. He dives, twists and turns, evading the gunfire and surviving while his fellow Spitfires race to the rescue. They arrive and the chase turns into a chaotic battle. The Spitfires try as they might, but they're operating an older spec of the iconic aircraft, one that's now outclassed by the 190s in almost every respect. Their attacks are avoided with ease, and it doesn't take long before a 190 once again sets his sights on Hoover. Hoover's making a turn when suddenly a single 20mm shell strikes him at the root of the wing. In a blur, the wing shears off and his Spitfire twists in an uncontrollable tumble. Hoover hangs on and pulls himself out of the doomed machine. The parachute opens above the waters of the Mediterranean, with a battle raging above him. The parachute drifts down, and Hoover knows capture is inevitable. He had been fished out of the water by a German freighter. Since then, he spent his time bouncing from one detention facility to another. He was interrogated, tortured, and threatened with execution, but he never responded anything but his name, rank, and service number. 14 months later, on the 20th of April 1945, Hoover wakes up to yet another long day at Stalag Luft I, a prison camp for captured pilots outside Barth in Germany. Throughout the morning, the prisoners could hear explosions in the distance. It was the Soviets shelling a target several miles away as they push back the Germans bit by bit. With the front line encroaching onto the camp, most of the German guards had been sent elsewhere, leaving the camp with little more than a skeleton crew. Not fancying to fall under Soviet care, and with escape enticingly close, Hoover decided it was time for a breakout. Joining forces with pilot Jerome Ennis from the same squadron, a Canadian only known as George, and some cooperation from other prisoners, they hatched a simple plan. Days ago, they had found a wooden plank under one of the camp's buildings. Hoover had hatched an idea on how to use it to escape. They just needed a distraction. Late in the evening, a few of Hoover's friends pretended to get angry at one another, shouting obscenities and escalating to violence.
Hit me before I lose my nerve, like in the face. Surprise me.
Men quickly gathered around the fight, and the shouting was heard across the camp. The few guards didn't intervene, but kept an eye on the commotion to make sure it didn't blow over. Meanwhile, out of sight, Hoover, Ennis, and George make a run for the fence with the wooden plank in hand. Swiftly, they placed the plank over the barbed wire, and its weight squished it down. One by one, they carefully walked over it, jumping down the other side to freedom. They swiftly disappear into the forest, unseen. Their escape had gone shockingly smooth, even considering how little guards were left. By the time they reached a nearby town, it was just the two of them. George had decided to go his own way, and Hoover would never know what became of him. The night falling, they found and broke into a farmhouse where they could stay the night. The next morning, they were jolted awake by the doors of the farmhouse opening up. They had just been caught. But to their great relief, the woman calmly asked, "Who are you?" in French. She appeared to be French, relocated to Eastern Germany for labor, and when Hoover said he is planning to make a journey to American lines, she gave him a small handgun with a couple of magazines. Moved by this gesture, Hoover wrote a note thanking her and asking any Allied soldier not to harm her. She was very grateful, understanding its implications. Not long after the pair had said their goodbyes to the lady, Hoover and Ennis stole some bicycles and made their way west for several miles until they stumbled across an oddly quiet German airfield with aircraft lined up. Seeing a chance for a ticket home, Hoover insists to break in to investigate. Ennis is less keen.
Are you sure, Bob? It's dangerous.
But he accepts, and the pair jump the fence. The field is deathly quiet, apparently abandoned. Hoover approaches the line of sitting Me-109s, but is disappointed to realize the ones before him have been heavily shot. The base, it seems, was a repair shop. They wade through the line, inspecting each machine. Some are better than others, a few even seeming airworthy, but sadly lacking any fuel. Leaving behind the 109s, Hoover spots an FW-190 and approaches it to inspect it. It looks intact from the outside, so Hoover jumps up to take a peek into the cockpit. It's when both are surprised by someone shouting, "Halt!" Instantly, Ennis draws the pistol and aims it square to a German mechanic's chest. "Freeze!" he orders, and the unarmed German has no option but to comply. With the mechanic held at gunpoint, they prepare the machine for takeoff. The weapons appear to be inoperable, but fortunately, it has a full tank of fuel. Confident that he can fly the machine, Hoover waves for Ennis to climb aboard. But his friend waves back a negative.
I never want to fly again. You go.
Hoover is hesitant, but goes for it. He salutes his good friend for one final time before closing the canopy and slamming the throttle to full. The 190 picks up speed quickly. Hoover doesn't bother taxiing at all. He sends it straight through the grass, and the machine rises into the air. Gaining altitude, Hoover is now faced with the issue of navigation. He's no idea where he is, but with the altitude, he spots the northern coast of Germany and uses the position of the sun to figure out the cardinal directions. With those two things to work with, he decides to make his way west, hoping to see the iconic windmills of the Netherlands. The entire time he flies with his heart racing on his chest. The reality of what he's doing is beginning to hit. He's taking a German plane with German markings and flying it straight over a very active front line, hoping to land on Allied-held territory. It was nothing short of a death wish. He attempted flying just below the clouds to avoid detection, but he knew he was on a wing and a prayer. He flew and flew over the Jutland Peninsula and following the coast beyond, completely blind as to what exactly lay below him. He was doing nothing but keeping the aircraft straight, and yet his heart raced. At any moment he could be pounced upon by a squadron of Allied fighters or shot by an anti-aircraft battery. And then a windmill appeared on the horizon. Somehow he had passed the front undisturbed. He spots a couple of airfields, but fears he could either be attacked or land on a mined runway. Instead, he aims for a grass field. He slows as much as possible, skimming the ground, until the aircraft stalls and the belly slams onto the ground. Hoover is shaken but unharmed. Local farmers swarm the crash site, pitchforks in hand. They order him to get out in Dutch, believing him to be German. He's captured by the angry civilians and taken to a nearby town where a British Army supply truck happened to be passing by, and he was able to explain the situation. The British soldiers took him in, and he'd finally earned his freedom. Robert Anderson Hoover would survive the war and go on to gain fame as a stunt flyer, test pilot, and instructor. Jerome Ennis would also successfully escape. They reunited years later during one of Hoover's air shows, during which Ennis passed the time telling the story of their escape to the guests. For his side, Hoover was never proud of that flight, stating, "It was about the dumbest thing I'd ever done." Roughly a week after his escape, the last of the German guards fled Stalag Luft I, and it was properly liberated by the Red Army on May the 1st. So Hoover would very likely have survived anyway. Still, he remains one of the very few to have the honor of having stolen a Luftwaffe warplane. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for the dogfight that led to his capture.
Jared, get on in. Let me be all right. I told you, I never want to fly again.
He lived a long life and passed away in 2016, aged 94. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and please watch more videos of ours. Thank you.